families, creating a lifetime of memories. Sadly, some families are denied these important moments due to the sad practice of alienation. These are families divided.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Families Divided TV. When a target parent is blindsided by court involvement and processes their need to utilize and engage appropriate professionals is crucial. Early intervention in families in the midst of litigation is essential in preventing the long-term effects of parental alienation. However, few judges and professionals are equipped to identify and act on the behaviors and tactics that the manipulative alienating parent utilizes to destroy the other parent's relationship with the child. In this segment, Chris Turner is going to share tactics and behaviors as well as best practices by the professionals, both court appointed and privately, and will be defined in these cases. This is a great episode. Chris gave us much strong information, and you really want to take notes for this one too. This one's very good. We're going to be back with Chris Turner right after this important message.
Divorce and co-parenting are a major life interruption for families, especially the kids, but also for parents and grandparents. And it's even worse in blame-filled, high-conflict cases. When parents engage in alienation by turning the kids against the other parent or grandparents, kids suffer. They're denied the opportunity to build the 4 big skills necessary for future resilience. New Ways for Families online class can help. Parents learn to use our popular BIF and EAR skills to calm the conflict and stop the hostile emails and texts. And we even have a class for kids and parents to learn together. Research shows a 75% improvement in joint parental decision-making after this course is taken, plus overall improvements for kids' well-being. Don't wait to make this affordable investment in your children's future and improve your well-being too. Start learning new ways for your family today at conflictplaybook.com.
Hello, and thank you for tuning in. Today we're going to be talking about preventing the effects of parental alienation. Early intervention and prevention is very crucial in these cases. So we're going to look at a case study and talk about that, as well as some of the things where we can intervene early in a case, looking at the early signs of tactics, behavioral indicators, interactions with that parent, and looking at those specific things in terms of appointments of the court, in the use of therapists, facilitators, coordinators, and the like. My name is Chris Turner, and I am a mediator, and my practice has spanned over 20 years and is involved with not only high conflict cases, but also those cases that are pro se, where people are representing themselves and really trying to put their families first. So I have a broad view of what has worked and what hasn't worked in some of these families, where parents either are getting along very, very well and continue to, or they begin to get along well, and as they go through the system, alienation begins and the tactics, and the case gets way off track in terms of the relationships between the parents and the children. So we're going to spend some time based on my experience of these cases, of what we see are some of the indicators and one of the ways that we can intervene. And so let's look at a case that here first that was just a little too late, and the need for early intervention was really important. This is the R case. So let me tell you a little bit about that. So the mom and dad divorced about 9 years ago when the children were 10 and 7. Both children are girls. There was no history of abuse, no allegations of abuse. There was no relational interruption or ongoing conflict between mother and children and father and children. But there were marital issues between the parties. And father described the wife ongoing as narcissistic, passive aggressive, and controlling. And we know that in many of these cases, when we see propensity towards parental alienation or resist or refuse in the children, there is some pathology, and so the narcissistic personality is very much entrenched in that. A lot of passive aggressive and controlling. And if you're aware of a lot of the studies done specifically by Jennifer Harman on domestic violence and the control and the power and control within these cases, it was really clear in this particular case where the mother in this case was very controlling and very abusive emotionally of the father in front of the children. The mother described herself as a nurturing parent. It's a real kind of martyr syndrome, gave up her life for the children, put everything on hold, and made sure that everyone knew that she was really the provider and the person that was primary for the children. And so the parties attempted to get along and did for several years. They both remarried. And when the older child reached the age of 12, 2 years after the divorce, she started to choose to stay home rather than go to her father's. And many children believe that because they're told by their parents at the age of 12 or 13, they can choose who to stay with. And that's true in some jurisdictions, but most jurisdictions recognize that children should not be in charge of making adult decisions and relational decisions regarding their parents at that age. Children may have a voice in many of these cases, but rarely are they allowed to choose who they stay with anymore. But dad allowed that to happen because she was a teen girl and didn't want there to be strife and distance between the two. He didn't want to exacerbate the situation. So when she started saying she didn't want to go to his house, he would talk to her, and mother was encouraging her not to go to dad's. And so she stopped going to that, to the point where she spent less and less time with the father. And by the age of 15, she stopped visitation. So 5 years into that post-divorce time, she stopped visiting her dad. The younger daughter continued visitation with her father and had few modifications of that. She had the normal teenage type of changes, right? And she had the normal, preteen behaviors that the dad would see and the mom would see. And obviously her peer group became primary in her point of view regarding who she wanted to be around. And so he would let her have some leeway regarding that visitation on weekends when she had things going on with friends, and he would try to get her around those times. So still giving her some say in that visitation, but not negating that whole visitation plan. The older daughter, who at this point was not seeing her dad, started having issues with anxiety and depression, in addition to no contact with her dad. And this is very common in these cases, that the symptoms that the children come up with when they are alienated and when their brain is being hijacked do have issues with anxiety and depression in many of these cases. The father asked the court for reinforcement of visitation as well as counseling, and the court ordered counseling for the child, making the child the primary focus of that rather than the alienation or what's going on with the family system based on her anxiety and depression. The therapist that was involved encouraged dad to let the child to have her space. And we hear this over and over again with therapists that are not aware of parental alienation or simply don't believe in the diagnosis of parental alienation, that the child needs to have her space and she'll come around when she sees she's ready to. Currently, dad has spent $75,000, over $75,000 in court costs, and he's not seen his elder daughter in 2 years and is very concerned about the relationship with his younger daughter. They've been in litigation now for the past 7 months. So what could have changed in this particular case? Well, there's reason to believe that through early prevention, education, intervention, that all could have changed. And a lot of that has to do with education. So we're going to talk about those specific 3 things: prevention, education, and early intervention. In prevention, it's important in these cases for parties to follow through, and that both parties have follow through. It's very difficult. The age where most children start to separate from those parents are during their preteen years, right around the age of 11, 12, or 13. So a young child may not be as susceptible to the long-term effects of alienation and may have some resist refuse, but they don't escalate to the severe as quickly as they do when they are actually in the preteen years, 10, 12, 11, 12, 13, where they can make more choices and they can be much more affected by some of the messages that are being sent, a manipulation of their thoughts process by one of the parents. And so it's really important that that follow through by all the parties happen, and that the orders that are put in place by the court regarding visitation and access reflects the inevitable. I mean, if we see that there is a disposition towards one parent favoring the child, or the child favoring one parent and starting to reject the other parent, that the orders reflect that. So if there is a situation where access is being interrupted, visitation is being interrupted, the orders can reflect that when that happens, something else will happen as a result of that. Rather than have to wait 6 months for the court case to come back up for a modification or a motion for enforcement to be acted on, those actual court orders, especially in mediation, we can get those agreements. So if she's not able to see her father on certain days, maybe when she has activities, what is the fallback? What is going to be his way of making up that time, or the other parent's ability to access that child? It's very important that those are outlined. And so a mediator can do that easily in mediation when they're talking about visitation and access. What happens if that doesn't happen? Is he going to be allowed makeup time? Is he going to get 2 weekends in a row? Is the other parent going to be allowed to pick them up extra days, so that can be lined out in an agreement and in the orders initially, so that if those fall through, there is a backup that will be in effect without having to go back to court. Setting boundaries and clear relationship goals are really important. And it's important that all parties, the parents as well as the children, do an ongoing self-assessment. This is particularly important for that alienated parent. If you feel that your relationship is being hijacked with your children, it is extremely important that you take care of yourself and that you ongoing assess what's going on. How is the communication working? Perhaps you were co-parenting and you were having conversations via text or phone calls. Taking that assessment and saying, is that still working? Or is the power and control becoming so clear that you're being manipulated into agreeing to things that you wouldn't normally agree to? And do you need to take the emotion out of it and possibly go through a third party, like our family wizard, parenting talk, help time for parents, where you are not having to deal directly with that person, and as a result, not having that manipulation as part of your relationship with your children. Looking at the parenting styles. Is your co-parenting model still effective? And so for many parents, they believe that co-parenting is the end-all be-all. And we hope that parents would be able to communicate and be able to co-parent together for the best interest of their children. However, if that's not working, it may be time to parallel parent. If there are too many emotional issues that are affecting you in co-parenting, if that balance of impact of power and control is continuing to be an issue, perhaps you need to go to a parallel parenting model where your time with your children is very different from the time with the other parent. Your rules and your goals and your boundaries are set in your home, and they may not be consistent with the other parents, but it doesn't matter, because that time is about your time with the child, not necessarily about co-parenting. Again, we would hope that parents would be willing and able to co-parent, but if you can't, go to parallel parenting modes and choose that style. You can always come back to parallel to co-parenting when you are communicating better and when emotions are not at the forefront of the decisions you're making. The self-assessment also includes looking at triggers, looking at the behaviors and your reactions to what's happening. Are you being beaten down too much? Are you allowing that other parent too much control so you're agreeing to certain things, or do they know how to push your buttons so that you're reacting? And again, they're using the tools that they have, and it's important that you do that self-assessment and do some real reflection and thinking and coordinating and behavioral responses to those triggers so that you're not reacting in the same way and you can't be manipulated and your interventions with your children are consistent and not being derailed. So looking for those triggers and self-assessment is important. Redirecting the use of language that encourages barriers. And so making sure that you're redirecting those languages that have a separation and create more conflict in the family. For example, asking a child that they can stay at their house or they can go to dad's house or mom's house. No, the child has two homes and both homes are their homes. So using simply the term of saying going to your dad's house or going to your mom's house puts that boundary and puts that line between what is theirs and what is another person's house. And using that language to reflect that these are both homes of the child and making sure that that child is aware of that. Not allowing the child to call a parent by their first name and continue to call them mom and dad. And so using those languages, that language with the child and encouraging that language with the other parent that discourages those barriers from coming up. So ongoing self-assessment, again, about communication models, your parenting styles, looking at triggers, and the use of language that encourages behavior, making sure that we're staying on top of that ongoing. Because as a case escalates, things that maybe were effective earlier on are not now. And so make sure that you're self-assessing, as well as taking care of yourself and your personal well-being to make sure that you're on top of your game. Letting yourself not get run down, not get beaten down, so that you become the person that they say you are. Someone that can't follow through, someone that's scattered, someone that is not healthy. Making sure to take care of ourselves ongoingly. Education early on and frequent in these cases is really important for prevention. And that's education of the parents ongoing, the attorneys, the judiciary, the third parties. So let's look at each of those areas. Education is super important in these areas. And education should include for those parties an overview of development. Where is the child now and how are they developing? And at what age are they more susceptible? And at what age can you set more boundaries? So understanding where the child is developmentally and working your relationship appropriately so that you are continuing to move forward with that child. Education about the effects of trauma on the brain. And we talk a lot about ACEs, and there's been quite a few presentations in this forum regarding trauma and the ACEs and the effect of manipulation on a child's brain, especially when it is that negative manipulation that leads to parental alienation. Education of the tactics and indicators that constitute whether a child is being alienated. And we'll look at those a little bit closer in a moment. But there's behavioral responses to those as well. How is the child reacting? And education about things like when a child starts to be depressed or anxious. If the child is having panic attacks, are those behavioral responses appropriate? And is something more going on in terms of parental alienation tactics that is leading to that? Making sure that the child is getting help from the appropriate provider who is aware of those. And so for all of those professionals, the parents, the attorneys, the judiciary, and the therapists, the third parties such as therapists, amicus attorneys, attorney ad litems that are involved with that child, that they have all of these tools in their toolboxes and they have education about that. Don't just document what's going on with the child, label it. And so we know that bad mouthing, limiting contact, interfering with communication, interfering with symbolic communication, withdrawal of love, telling the target parent that, telling the child that the target parent doesn't love them, forcing the child to choose, making sure that we're not just saying that the child did not come, but looking back and labeling what it was that actually happened. Was there interference with communication? What did that look like? Was the child allowed to call the parent or return the parent's calls? Was the child allowed to come on visitation, or was there interruption of that? Some other things that you can have specifically labeled in terms of the child's behaviors and tactics that are being used is the child is asked to spy on the target parent? Is the child asking to keep things secret from the target parent? Referring to that target parent by their first name, referring to them as mom, the stepdad as mom or dad, or encouraging the child to call mom or dad, use that name for someone else that is living with one of the parents. Withholding information, getting things changed on documents at the school, on their sports activities, cultivating dependency and confiding in the child. All of these things are forcing a child to reject one of the parents and can lead to alienation. Again, like as is true with all other abuses, in and of itself, it may be bad behavior, but combined with 5 or 6 different tactics that are being used and different indicators of parental alienation, they sum up to indicating that there is more going on. And so making sure that we're not just documenting what the child did or said, but specifically it was this tactic being used, and making sure that we're able to label that. Using the 5-factor model on these cases, did you have an ongoing relationship with this child prior to, and what changed? And so when we try to find the basis based on the science and the research, we look at the 5-factor model. So start in your case earlier on preventatively by keeping check of that. Is there a contact refusal? Was there a prior positive relationship with you? Is there an absence of abuse or neglect? So we know that if there's been abuse and neglect, or there's been a period of time with no contact, perhaps reunification is important, because that child needs to be reintroduced based on some previous behaviors. But if there has not been abuse and neglect, that's one of the factors we look at: an absence of that abuse and neglect, and a decreased contact with that parent. Are the alienating behaviors of the preferred parent there? And is the child manifesting some of the symptoms that we talked about of parental alienation? If those things are starting to happen and you're seeing that, it's important, whether it's early on in the case or it's a new behavior, it's important you intervene quickly and make sure that that parent is accountable. So for many of my cases, when they come to mediation, they may say, well, we see a little bit of this, or there's starting to be some refusal by the child to come to me, and parents want to give that other parent some leeway. They don't want to stir things up. They don't want to have to go back to court. You know that relationship with that other parent. And so it's important that you have a clear understanding. You've gotten some distance from them. You can see them and see what they're doing. You understand the way that they communicate and what is normal and not, and making them accountable for that. Don't wait till the 11th hour when you're having no contact with your child to intervene. If you see those behaviors, if you know that personality is there, perhaps there's some pathology, perhaps there's been a history of abuse, neglect with that parent, perhaps there has been previous instances of interfering with your access. Don't wait till it gets so severe to get some attention to it. Make them accountable. Yeah, if it means taking them back to court to get that visitation revised, if it means getting them into therapy and making sure that you have contact with a therapist to let them know also what's going on, making sure that that happens early on in the case. Those third parties are very important. That amicus attorney, if there's a facilitator, a parent facilitator, a parent coordinator, making sure that they are aware of the specific labeled behaviors that are happening with your child that is interfering with your relationship with them. If there's a court-appointed therapist, making sure that they are well trained and that they are aware of that situation. And of course, if an evaluation has been requested, whether it's a psych eval or a parenting child custody evaluation, making sure that they're aware of that, and not just talking about feelings that you have or concerns you have, but specific behaviors, labeling those behaviors based on some of the research that's been done about interventions, and some of those key indicators, behavioral indicators of alienation, being able to be labeled for those clients. And the best place to look for those is to find the 17 parental alienation strategies. And there's some great books out there by Amy Baker, who's labeled these, and Paul Fine, specifically Beyond the High Road, responding to those, making sure that you are able to label each of those so you are clear in the case about what specifically is happening, not just feelings that you have about that. There are some barriers and factors that are going to be available, that are going to be important in your case as well. Looking at the pathology of the other parent. If you suspect that that parent is going ahead and interfering with your access and possibly turning your child away from you, and making them more dependent on that other parent, think back to those times when you were concerned about their pathology. Was there something there? Many times we haven't brought that into a case until we see the behaviors that are escalating. But get some distance from that other parent and look specifically. If this wasn't another situation and I was helping a friend with this, would they see these indicators and that pathology that was there? Was there some concern during your marriage or during your relationship with that person that you had? Making sure that you're taking stock of that and being aware of that. Looking at the age of the child. Again, once that child hits those preteen years, or that 11, 12-year-old, they're much more susceptible to start feeding into that. And so we may see that parents do very, very well with their children at a younger age, but when that child gets to be 10, 11, or 12, they start to have some serious resist and refuse issues with that child. So be aware that just because they've been getting along during those younger years and they turned around during the visitation with you, that doesn't mean that it's going to stay that way. So keeping that at the forefront, that age of the child is an important factor. Looking at that power and control. How are you allowing that other parent to maintain that power and control? And if that was an indicator in your relationship early on, perhaps as we talked about our case before, where the parent was the primary at-home caregiver and gave up what she deemed, gave it to her life for the children, and the dad was working and out of the home all the time, or was there that power and control that she was able to get when you were together, that possibly now that you have some distance from that other parent, they're trying to get in other ways and using the child to get that power and control in that relationship? Are there financial restrictions that you need to be aware of? Many times parents let these cases go because of the fact that they have financial restrictions on them regarding whether they can go back to court and finalize this. Can they go back and take the time off from work? Do they have the financial ability to hire an attorney? I want to say this very clearly. In these cases, it is not appropriate if you are concerned about parental alienation and if your interactions with your child are being undermined by a party, whether it's the other parent or family of the other parent or a third party that's intervened in the family, such as a step parent, that you place that as a high priority in your relationship, and that you make sure that you take the time to really think through that and not be your own attorney. These cases do not go well when people are pro se. If you suspect parental alienation, it is worth it to you to find the money some way to go back to court or go back to mediation and get this documented, because those financial restrictions will just bite you later on when you've messed up a case because you've represented yourself because you couldn't afford an attorney. Find a way to make sure that you are not representing yourself and that you have a voice in court, a knowledgeable voice in court that can speak for you. That's one of the huge barriers that we see, is that time and energy spent in litigation is daunting, as well as those financial restrictions. But this is your relationship with your child. This is your child's mental health at risk, and your child will continue to have unfettered time with that other parent as you wait through the time that you need to spend in litigation or getting a response. The process of a case should be very seamless. So if you look at early, an early divorce for a normal case situation, maybe a petition is followed and then that person is served, they have an answer. You may go to mediation and before temporary orders are put in place, may go to mediation after temporary orders are put in place for the final hearing. And generally, during that whole time, if it's managed well, that may take 6 months to 9 months to follow through on. These cases are lingering in courts for extended periods of time. So we know that if a case has been fairly seamless up until a certain point, the child is turning to be preteen and all of a sudden there's modification after modification of the court order and there's motions to change things. That is a flag for those of us who are looking at cases coming through family courts. If there are ongoing modifications where a parent is getting control through the court system using the child, that's a flag to us. It doesn't necessarily mean there's parental alienation going on, but it's a flag that we need to look deeper at that case and be able to look at it. Because as I said, those modifications shouldn't take that long to process through the courts. And some of that is left to the goodness of the attorney that you have, the appropriate right representation you have of someone who understands those warning signs and those indicators of parental alienation, and expedites that case rather than continuances. It's important that we get in there and get those heard so that the child is not allowed unfettered time with that parent who is possibly railroading your relationship. We know that these cases do best, and the best practice in these cases is to take care of yourself. Maintain your mental and emotional health, primary, first and foremost. You cannot function, especially if you've been in a domestic violence situation, which family interactions involved in parental alienation definitely have those indicators of domestic violence or interpersonal control, where that power and control is imbalanced. It's very easy to be manipulated and to give in and to do what's easiest for the sake of the family as a whole, when actually you're creating a greater imbalance of power. So making sure that you are advocating for yourself, and if you can't because you are financially or emotionally distraught, take care of yourself first before you get into these situations where you're agreeing to things that maybe are not in the best interest of you and your child. Another best practice that we look at is that during those temporary orders, take that time. So parents say, I'm just going to get along with the temporary orders. And this is, we've had a motion before the court or a file for divorce now. We're headed for temporary orders. And, I'm going to allow these things to happen during temporary orders because I'll fix it at the final order. Not a good situation to be in. If you're concerned about that, do not let go of those temporary orders until they are something that you can live with long term. Those temporary orders may be in place for an extended period of time. Those temporary orders often set the tone for the way things are going to be in the future. So making sure that you're allowing yourself that distance and that perspective during that time of temporary orders to really advocate for yourself. Some parents are agreeing to stay in the same home because it's more cost effective. And being under that thumb in an unhealthy environment will lead one person to be more in control than the other. And so get that distance, move out of that separate home, try not to cohabitate with that person or allow that person. I'm not saying don't give concessions, but those concessions that you give should be equal. You give some, they give some. But if it's all one-sided, there's an imbalance there that needs to be backed up. And the damage that you're doing to yourself by allowing that power imbalance to continue and by not recognizing that can affect your case long term. Be critical of what's going on. Don't exercise or minimize what's going on. Oh, they're just having a hard time. Things will get better. I'll catch up with it later on. The longer that your child is exposed to some of these negative behaviors and these tactics being used within the home to create distance between you and your child, the harder it is to undo them and the more damage is being done to your child. So don't excuse or minimize, advocate for yourself during that time and be critical of this situation. Maintain and renew that relationship with your child. It's important that you, as you separate or as you develop that relationship with your child, that you begin new rituals and new traditions with your child. Yes, parents need to separate and be able to have time alone with each of their children during main times like holidays, like Christmas holidays, where they have rituals and traditions that they have. What happens with you when you have that child? Do you do the same traditions and do you create new rituals and traditions for that situation? One of my dads used to say, well, my kids always went to their grandparents ongoing in the 10 years we were married. They always went to the maternal grandparents' home, and that's what's consistent for them. So I'm going to allow them to have that time. Think clearly about that, about whether or not that's worth it. That means that every Christmas, those kids are gone and they've got undivided time with that one parent. Create a new tradition with those children so that you have got that balance and that you have new traditions that you're establishing. It will be different for the children, but they will adapt and they will learn to value the time with you as well as with that other parent. And understand your child's development, where they are and what their needs are based on their emotional and their physical and behavioral development. In your best practices of the case, be aware and document techniques and tactics based on the checklist that you have about the indicators, the tactics, and the behaviors in the children. Make sure that you're documenting them and just the facts. Courts are interested in knowing what the research shows and how your case fits into it. So use that research as you see things happening to document specifically what's going on. Utilize the agents of the court. Find qualified therapists, evaluators, coordinators, facilitators, amicus attorneys, all of those people that are going to be reporting back to the court. Make sure that they are qualified. And by qualified, I mean make sure that they not only have the background that you need, but that they have specific background in parental alienation, resist refuse situations, or reunification therapy, that they understand those same things that you're looking at in terms of the techniques and the tactics and the behavioral indicators of parental alienation that may be present in your case. Make sure you're choosing those qualified people and that you're agreeing to those agents of the court. Come to court with a list of people that you know have that experience in the field that can document this for your case. Those people will remain impartial and use those qualifications to help document and support your case if there is alienation going on. Follow the orders of the court. So many times I'll get a case that's blowing up because it says as mutually agreed upon. And so those rights and responsibilities of the parents to make choices for their children in terms of medical and educational, are they clear and concise? And what if you don't agree? But leaving very little, if you know that there is an imbalance of power, if there is a control issue by one party or the other, if there's a pathology issue involved with one of the parties and parental alienation has started, follow the orders to the T and make sure that you're not doing things that are mutually agreed upon and that can be manipulated even more. Doesn't mean that you're not being a willing participant in getting along with your co-parent. It just means that it's clear and you're taking the emotion out of it and allowing the court orders to hold still. It's important that we find value in that other parent and valuing that other parent more than you value your need to win. It's not about the win in court. It's not about that. The win in court is access to your child. The win in court is having a good relationship with both parents as best they can with that child and balancing those tables, making sure that you are able to do that so that early prevention, education of all the professionals, and intervention when you see things happening that are indicators of behavioral indicators of abuse, neglect, or tactics being used that are abusive and neglectful of your relationship with that child, which we call parental alienation, making sure that you address those and get intervention early on in the case, not waiting for it to escalate till you actually have specific proof and the damage is done. Invest in the psychological development of your child. These Studies have shown that over time, that psychological development and the brain development is affected when children are alienated from their parents. And so making sure that you invest in that, invest your time, invest your money, invest your energy in that development of your child for their best interest as they move forward. It's much more important than your next vacation. It's much more important than having a great time and doing wonderful activities with your child, investing in them and making sure that they are safe and healthy and moving forward. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, my name is Chris Turner. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have. You can reach me, and in the PowerPoint is all my contact information. I thank you for your time today, and I wish you the best of luck moving forward.
In our next episode of Families Divided TV, Dr. Stan Carosi discusses the ideologizing and alienation empowering targeted parents.